Hey guys, CB Super. I'm going to show you how to make thumbnails for YouTube using DaVinci Resolve. Let's go ahead and jump right into it. So before we even get started, I'm not a graphic designer. These days, I really have to use something as reference material. I don't have time to be creative. So lately I've been going to this website called Placeit, and this video is not sponsored by them. I wish it was. Go to placeit.net. They have tons of different templates you can use. They know what they're doing when they're designing. You could also go to like Fiverr and just look up a bunch of templates or designs for thumbnails. So in order to find YouTube thumbnails, just come over to Designs, YouTube Thumbnails. Find a thumbnail that you like. As you can tell by looking at all of my thumbnails, I really don't know what I'm doing when it comes to doing thumbnails. So I'm just going to start copying like other people's designs for thumbnails. I'm going to go ahead and do this one right here. It looks pretty cool. It's nice and clean, and that's kind of what I'm looking for. So I'm not sure how the subscription system works on here, and to be honest, I'm not even going to look into it. If you start playing around with changing all the text and all that, it's going to lock up until you either create an account or you clear out all your cookie history and browser history. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to screenshot this. If you're on a Mac, it's just Shift+Command+4, or if you're on a PC, you could always use the snippet tool. It gives me some crosshairs. You see the crosshairs. I'm just going to, as close to it as I can, I'm just going to try and get a good sample. I'm going to just save this to my desktop. I've already done it, so I'm actually not going to do it this time. And now I'm just going to jump right over to DaVinci. I'm just going to drop a brand new Fusion composition down on my timeline. I'm going to just make sure that my timeline resolution is 1920 by 1080. I found that that's the resolution that YouTube seems to like for thumbnails. I'm going to jump over to the Fusion tab, and I'm just going to go ahead and start getting into it here. There is no media in node, and that's because there was no media on the actual timeline. We just created a Fusion composition. So when you create a Fusion composition, you don't have a media in that's going to set your resolution. So you actually have to set your own resolution. And the way that I do that is just by bringing in a background node, and I pipe the background node, the output, into the input of the media out just by dropping it on that. Now give yourself a good amount of room, because we're actually going to be using just about all of the room here to put a bunch of things in between the media in and the media out, or in this case, the background and the media out. We're going to be using all this to stuff all of the things of our composition in here. I'm going to go ahead and bring in my media by importing into my media pool. Come down to wherever your thumbnail is. This is the thumbnail reference. I'm going to go ahead and double click on that, hit open, and there we go. I'm going to drop this right into the node panel. So I'm going to go ahead and load this up, and one thing you'll notice is that the frame size, the resolution, is 751 by 424. We use this background to set the resolution of the comp. There is a yellow line that extends all the way along the bottom here. That is going to be the baseline for our composition. So everything is going to be put on top of that. This background image will be the background image, like the very bottom of the layer system, whereas the media out will be at the very top of the layers. If this was a layer-based composite or something similar to like After Effects. I'm going to take this reference image, which is the screenshot of that thumbnail that we like. I'm going to rename this. I'm just going to F2 to rename it, and I'm just going to type reference. And I'm going to merge this into the pipeline, but I want it to be merged all the way over here. And so to do that, I'm just going to left click and drag the output into the output of the background. If I drop it right on that white box there, it's going to go ahead and create a merge right underneath my tool, which is exactly where I want it. I want it to be the very top thing that you see. You'll notice if I actually load this merge node in, you'll see that there is a drastically different size difference in the composition, which is the 1920 by 1080p, versus the actual reference size image, which is quite a bit smaller. An easy way to adjust that is I can either come into this merge node and I can size it up, or, which might be a better way, is just to bring in a resize node. So Shift+Space to bring up the quick select tool, and I'm just going to type in the word resize in, and I'll see that the resize is the one that is highlighted. Press enter to add it. Now you'll notice that this is the correct size. You can tell that the resolution isn't the best, and that's because, you know, it's a pretty small image. When you're using a reference image, it's a lot easier if you actually bring in a second screen. So this dual viewer button up here will allow you to have two screens. So now we'll be able to work in this other side while we look at things in the right side. So it'll just make it a little bit easier for us to work that way. So in this image, let's take a look at what we see. There is some kind of image. It looks like keys in the background. So it may be a computer keyboard. They're lit, so they're pretty cool looking. Then there is this yellow background that is almost taking up about half the real estate of the frame. There's this white inset here that we can probably make, and then there's some text on top of it along with some graphics that have been kind of overlaid with different levels of opacity. Let's go ahead and quickly build all of that stuff into ours. Now, our goal isn't to exactly copy it. Our goal is to use this as a reference image to make something very similar because, again, if you're like me, I'm not a graphic designer. I don't know what looks cool. In fact, I wear like the same clothes every day. So I'm not a cool person. I need to bring in an image. I want an image that's going to be at the very bottom. I went ahead and already found an image. I'll go ahead and bring it in. I just got it off of Pixabay. It's just a motherboard. That's it. It looks kind of cool. I thought this would make a cool looking graphic image on there. It's 2250 by 1529. I want to make this 1920 by 1080. So again, Shift+Space, resize is already selected. Go ahead and hit enter. Load the merge in there and you'll see that it is now 1920 by 1080. For whatever reason, I don't like that aspect ratio. I think that it squashed it too much going from here to there because you'll notice that this is taller. Let's say I want to stretch this out. In between the media in and the resize, I can Shift+Space, type in XF to bring in a transform node. And then I can come over to the inspector and I can just, where it says use size and aspect, I can just uncheck that box. Now I can size up the X and the Y independently of each other. X is left to right, Y is up down. So if I want to stretch it out, I can slide this Y slider to the right a little bit and that looks good to me. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and merge that in again because I want to look at this merge. There's a couple things we can start to add here. I can kind of spice this up a little bit. Now, I noticed that they use this really cool, like this is a lighted keyboard. I can't replicate this exact effect, but I can play around with it and I can change it a little bit so that I get maybe a cool highlighted effect if I want. After the resize node, I'm just going to bring in a color corrector. So Shift+Space CC gives me a color corrector. The color corrector, I'm actually just going to start dropping the brightness down just to bring it down because it's a little bit bright. You'll notice that the side over here is brighter than the side over here. This is where your focus is going to be drawn. This is just kind of like a secondary image. Now that I've darkened this up a little bit, there is a couple things that I can do in order to kind of spice this side up a little. Let's go ahead and bring in a couple different nodes just to kind of spice it up, maybe add like a little bit of, flair to it. So the nodes that I'm going to bring in are, I'm going to Shift+Space, I'm going to type in the abstraction node, Shift+Space, I'm going to bring in a edge detect, so start to type in the word edge detect. Let's bring in a bitmap node, and then I'm just going to grab a background node as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and unconnect all of these just because I don't really need them to be connected to each other, and I'm just going to kind of move them off to the side for a second here. I want everything that I'm going to be doing, I want it to work after this resize node because I want it to be the correct size when I start plugging things into it. So this abstraction node is pretty cool. I'm going to go ahead and plug this output into the abstraction. And then I'm going to load this up to show you exactly what it's doing. It's kind of like an edge detect where it removes some detail, kind of blurs out some of the smaller details, and then the larger details, I guess it abstracts. You can play around with the settings over here. The only settings I play around with generally is the abstraction strength. I'm going to go ahead and leave the quantization off. I think I'm going to turn the iterate abstraction up, just because there's only certain things that I actually want to emphasize on here. I don't want to emphasize too much. So then I'm going to plug this into the edge detect. So this just turns it into a black and white map. You can use this edge detect for a lot of things. Unfortunately, the one thing you can't use it for is an alpha or a mask. So if I click over to see the actual alpha channel, you see the alpha channel is completely white, which means that everything is opaque and nothing is transparent. I want all of the black parts to be transparent and all the white parts to be opaque. So in order to do that, I have to plug this into a bitmap. So I'm going to take the output, plug it, drop it right into this bitmap node. By default, it's set to alpha. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the bitmap, and then I'm going to come over to where it says channel, hit channel, and I want it to be luminance. Bring this underneath here. So now when we click on the alpha, we'll see, okay, cool, now it's an alpha. That's good. That's what I want. Now I'm going to take this alpha output and I'm going to plug it into the background as a mask. By default, it's set to black. I don't want black. Let's go ahead and give it some kind of color that will look pretty cool against this green. So I'm not really great with like colors and telling you what's going to look cool and what's not. So let's go ahead and just play around with it. Maybe I'll try orange. We want it to take place after this color correction. To create a merge underneath it, all we got to do is plug it into the output after the color correction. And now let's kind of take a look. We've created these orange highlights. So maybe orange doesn't work all that well. You can just scroll through until you find something that looks cool. And actually, that doesn't look too bad right there. Like a lime green kind of. Could do blue. Red. Okay. Anyways, let's just go with this this bright green. That looks kind of interesting. So all we've done is we've taken this image, we've darkened it up a little bit. I can even bring this brightness down even more. And now we are left with this cool, like, kind of highlights, the neon green there. Now I could add glow to this, but to be honest, I really don't want glow on this. And our goal for this image isn't for it to stand out too much. It's just to look kind of cool if somebody actually, you know, decides to look at it a little bit closer. All right, so that's where we're at right now. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this media pool as I got all of the media that I need in here now. And I'm going to just plug back in this template. The next step is let's go ahead and create this background where it's going to cover up about half of the thumbnail. Obviously, we're going to bring in a background node, and we're just going to plug this background node into the pipeline, and we're going to load up this merge 4 into the viewer. So the first thing we notice is that we've taken a black background and we have dropped it onto our comp, which essentially turns the entire comp black, but we're actually going to mask a portion of this black background out to actually create this yellow background. So one thing we can do instead of black is we can actually just take the color picker, the eyedropper that's right next to the color tab, left click, hold, drag it, drop it on here, boom, now I have yellow. Now I want to mask a portion of this out. An easy way to do this is to, with the background selected, just go and hit polygon mask tool. I could also do this with any of these other tools, but the problem is that there's a little bit of an angle here that I want to maintain, so it's going to be a little bit easier if I just use the actual polygon tool. So I'm just going to click up here, click down here, kind of move it around until I get a good line, and then give myself a little bit of space all the way around. And you'll notice on the left side, it has already merged it because the merge was already in place. I'm going to give it just a little bit of soft edge, not too much. I don't want it to be too blurry. I just want it to kind of fade into it just a little bit. So now we have our image, we have our color overlay, and now we can go ahead and move on to the next step. Now, if you want to change the color, all you have to do is come over to the background, and we can go ahead and say if we want this green, you know, we can change it to green. That's done. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Let's go ahead and create this white box here. It's really just the same process, except for I'm going to bring in a solid, I'm going to bring in a background, I'm going to go ahead and merge this background in, and instead of using the polygon tool, I'm actually just going to bring in a rectangle and make it easy on myself. I'm going to bring that rectangle up right around to my reference image and just kind of size it right around the same. It doesn't have to be the exact same because remember, we don't need to copy this, we're just using this as reference. You'll notice that because I created this merge, this rectangle is actually plugged into the merge. That's not what I want. I actually want the rectangle plugged into this background node. And then load the merge up. You'll see that we've created that white box. So it's a little harsh. Let's go ahead and give it just a little bit of soft edge again, not too much, just a little. And there we go. That looks very organic. That looks perfect now. I'm just going to move this over just a little bit. We can go ahead and start renaming some of these. We can just change this to color BG. This one, we can rename it to white banner. All right, and then let's just keep moving this over just a little bit. We can decide here, do we want to create these crosses that they have, or do we want to start on the text? I think the crosses are pretty easy, and it's a little bit more complicated, but I want to show you how to do that real quick. So let's go ahead and start on the crosses. I'm going to go ahead and bring in a background. Instead of just a regular background, I'm going to load it up here, and I'm going to show you. We're going to do a couple things to make this a little bit different. Over in the inspector, go ahead and click on the image tab, which is the middle tab in between the two tabs. We're going to change the auto resolution. We're going to uncheck this box, and we're going to double click inside of the width and just type in, I don't know, 500 maybe, and then double click and 500 in the height. Now we've created this 500 by 500 box. I'm going to come back over the color tab, and I'm just going to turn this to white. We've changed this background from being the normal 1920 by 1080 composition to being a 500 by 500 size white background. Now, why did we do that? If we merge this onto the comp and then we go ahead and plug this in, you'll notice that now there's this 500 by 500 white square that's just in the middle of our comp. We're going to create our cross using this white square. So with this selected, I can just go ahead and hit that rectangle button, and now we can kind of just make a cross. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can make this however you want. You can make it skinny, you can make it fat, you can do whatever you want with it. I'm just going to Command C, Command V, or Control C, Control V if you're on a PC. I want to make an exact duplicate of that, and then in this one, I'm just going to to turn this one, the angle, double click in the angle, type in 90, and then click off, and then that will be a perfect cross. If you look at this now, we have this cross that's in the center of the screen. We're going to want to duplicate this like a lot of times. So what we're actually going to do is I'm just going to select all of this, Command G or Control G to group that together, and then I'm going to unplug it. And so now this is the group. So now I'm going to bring in another background, and I'm going to plug this background into that merge node, and I'm going to take this group and I'm going to merge it on top by dropping it into the output of the background node there. I'm going to come over to the background, and instead of picking a color, I'm actually going to drop this alpha all the way down. So now it's essentially a blank background that we just need the resolution. We want this 500 by 500 to merge on top of this background. I'm just going to slide this over a little bit and bring this background node up just so it's kind of out of the way, and I'm going to bring this node over to the right. We don't need to copy this node structure. All we got to do is we can grab the output, drop it in, and make another merge node, and we can use these merge nodes like transform nodes. The only difference between the merge and the transform node is really just the animation abilities that are in the transform node we don't necessarily have inside of the merge node, but you can use them similarly to where if you're just making something like a template or even something that's static and is not going to be animating, it's really simple. The only thing we're going to lose the pivot and the aspect X and Y's. Because this is going to maintain the same aspect ratio, I can just go ahead and size this down. I can kind of move this over, rotate this. I can even blend it down the opacity a little bit so it's not so, in your face. And then I come into this next merge. I can move this one over. I can rotate this one a little bit. I can either size it up or I can size it down. Maybe I'll size it down. And then I can control the opacity on this one as well. I can also bring in another background node, and I can say, let's color this one the same color as this background here. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to have to check off this auto resolution, 500, tab, 500. And now I can use this group as a mask into this background to change the color and merge this back in. And then I can still move this merge node maybe over here and kind of blend it in a little bit. So that's kind of how we create that really easily, real quickly. So now we have some of these icons. Now that I look at this, I think this one might be a little bit big. We'll go ahead and make it a little smaller. All right. So there's our icons or our graphics. You can add in different graphics. You can add in whatever you want. So I can just take this background since it's kind of the background and plug it into the top. All right, so we got one section left, and that is the text section. So let's go ahead and start bringing in the text. And before I do that, let's go ahead and kind of just bring in our reference so we can see what this does. So let's go ahead and bring in a text node first. Go ahead and merge it in to the background pipeline, and let's just kind of bring it in here. So the text is going to be on a white background first, so I'm actually going to change the color. Let's change it to black, and then come back over to the sliders, and then bring it down to like a gray. Mine is going to say thumbnails. Yours can say the top 10 or the best or whatever. Bring it up over here, and then we're just going to size it down. One thing I like to do is just find a font that works for me. I'm just using Impact because it's easy. I'm going to want to probably rename this just so I remember when I come back to this template later, this text is in the banner. F2, and I'm just going to call it the banner text. You can keep all your text together, or you can place them separately. The easiest thing to do, say if I wanted to make this a little bit smaller, like I want to have some kind of subtext, I can just copy and paste this, Command C, Command V, and then merge this in right here. Since it's going to be a subtext, it would make more sense to have these right next to each other. This one is just going to say 2, and then I could just move this over a little bit. If I want to make this smaller, I can either just use the size here, or I can go into the characters and I can come down to the size and I could just squash it in the Y if I wanted to do that. I like to do that sometimes because it maintains the same amount of width. So sometimes that looks cool, sometimes it doesn't. I'm going to go ahead and undo that just for now. So thumbnails 2, now that would be a subtext. I would just go ahead and come in here. I just hit F2, banner, subtext. You don't always need this. If for whatever reason you are not going to use the subtext, you can just come here, double click on this, and then you can actually just click off right here. That will disable that node so it's not showing. So for now, I'm going to disable it. Maybe I'll come back in later and I'll put in a subtext for whatever reason. This last text bit is pretty much the same. I'm just going to go ahead and copy paste this, Command C, Command V, move this one down even a little bit more. Go ahead and merge these together. This one will say DaVinci, probably going to be sized up a little bit, and I want this one to be black. Bring it down just a bit. anything that you put inside this text node is going to be represented when it actually creates this text. So if I was to put a space, you'll notice that it counts that as a character. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. So if I want this to be on top of it, I want to also type in resolve. If I was to add a space, 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 it's going to count that as a character. So just keep that in mind when you're using the text node. It's going to count any spaces as characters. If we look over on this side, we can see the line spacing, the spacing between the top and the bottom word is a little bit less. So I can come over to the line spacing, make it a little bit closer. Tracking will actually track the letters out a little bit if for whatever reason I want them to be wider away from each other. So you notice that this text is a little bit kind of like wider than the other text. An easy way to kind of do that without having to go and change your font is to come over to the shading tab and just come down to the size. And just like we were squashing that other one, the X, if we start to expand the X out a little bit, that's going to kind of stretch it out a little bit so you can kind of get like some free bolding. Because, impact, you can't make it any more bold than it already is. If you come over here to regular, there's nothing else. So, fake the bold a little bit by, just stretching it out. So just keep in mind, if you do it too much, you may have to track out a little bit just so you can get those letters away from each other and then stretch it out just a little bit more. Okay, so now that our thumbnail is done, the most important part is to actually export this, right? Because we've created a thumbnail, but if we don't export it, then what's the point of even doing this? Before we export it though, if you just need a one-off, then that's all there is to it. You can go ahead and export this, and I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. But if for whatever reason you want to be able to make this into a template, well, there's a really simple way to do that. But first, let's do a little bit of organizing. I'm just going to select this, Shift+Space, type in under for underlay. In order to move this, if I move this around just as it is, it's going to move around that node as well. I can kind of make this a little bit bigger, and then if I hold down the Option button or the Alt key, I can move just the underlay itself over. So what I'm going to do is Option, click on that underlay, and I'm going to hit F2 to rename it, and I'm going to type in image, because no matter what I do, I'm probably going to want to put an image of some sort on the very background, either on the left or the right side, whichever one I want to use. I want to change the color a little bit. Maybe I'll change it to orange. All right, and then so let's take a look at this color BG. So we've kind of already marked the color BG as if I want to change the color, all I have to do is come in here and I can just change this color to whatever I want. So we can leave that as is, but maybe we'll come in and we'll put an underlay as well. So with that selected, I can just Shift+Space, hit enter since underlay was already selected. And I can kind of resize this so that it's not including this polygon. Rename this, hit F2. We'll just call this color. Set color, and I'll just set this to like a lime green. Since I didn't really use the subtext, but the text is important, I'm just going to kind of bring these all over here, and I'm going to select all of those, Shift+Space, hit enter, and I'm just going to resize this a little bit. Remember Option to kind of move this around, and I'm going to go ahead and F2 to rename that, and I'm just going to type text. I'm going to go ahead and set color. Let's make this like, I don't know, purple. So that way, when I look at it from a distance, I know that this over here needs to be changed, this needs to be changed, and this needs to be changed in order for me to have a different thumbnail every time. So I can come over here, and this is my reference image. I no longer need this. I can select all three of those and just delete it. And now this is our final output. Before we actually export, one thing we can do is we're going to want to use this over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and save this Fusion composition, but there's a really easy way to do it. One thing we can do is we can actually just come over to our power bins. Now, if you're not familiar with power bins, I have a whole nother video on how to use power bins and where to find it, but let me just show you really quickly that you can come up to View, go all the way down to where it says Show Power Bins. So if you don't see Power Bins by default, just click on this and it will show you your Power Bins. Power Bins will be off here to the left, usually underneath your master bin. Just go ahead and click on this Power Bins, and then you can take this Fusion comp and you can drop it into your Power Bin. The nice thing about this is when I start another composition or a whole nother DaVinci project and I just want to bring out another thumbnail, all I got to do is grab that old Fusion comp. I can rename it to a thumbnail, but I can go ahead and bring that, drop it out, and now this is a whole new Fusion composition. I can jump into that Fusion, and now I know exactly where I have to update this, have to update that, and have to update this. In order for this to be a whole new thumbnail, it's a really easy way to work. Just use different colors to kind of draw your eyes and your attention so that you don't forget anything. So let's say I want to save this as a Fusion composition. If I don't want to use a power bin, which is the faster way to do it, but let's say I just want to save this as a Fusion composition, I can select the entire composition here. I can come up to File, Export Fusion Composition. Let's say I'm just going to save this to the desktop for now. I'm going to type in maybe thumbnail comp, hit save. Let's say I'm over here one day and I want to create a thumbnail real quick. I can just come up to File, Import Fusion Composition, go to my desktop, and then all I have to do is come down here and find the thumbnail composition, double click, and then it's going to go ahead and automatically bring that composition in. This comp will take over your old comp, so you may want to be in a new Fusion composition if you just want to recall that. This is our image. This is our thumbnail. It is completely done. We have one more step to do, and that is to export it. You're probably thinking, oh, I got to go into the delivery tab. I got to export this. Absolutely not. This is super simple. We don't do all that stuff that's probably the right way to do things. We do things the easy way because I'm lazy. So I'm going to just come over to this actual picture. I'm going to right click. I'm going to save image. And then I'm going to drop it on my desktop. I'm going to change the name to Demo Thumbnail. Maybe Demo Thumbnail 2 because I probably have filmed this like 3 or 4 times. I'm going to go from all files to JPEG because you know what? YouTube loves JPEGs. You can also do a .png, but I'm just going to do a JPEG. Hit save, and it's done. Now I can come over to my YouTube channel, and I can use this custom thumbnail that we have just created. There it is. We've just created our own custom thumbnail, and now we can use this in all of our videos. All right, let's say that we want to change this thumbnail out. Let me just go and click on my last video that I did here. I'm going to come down here, right here. If I was to hit this options and change, now I can just find that thumbnail on my desktop, double click it, and that will be my new thumbnail if I was to hit save, which I'm not going to because that's another tool video that I've already made. But that's how you do it. Super easy. I hope you guys got something out of this. I hope you guys watched it all the way to the end. If you have watched it all the way to the end, you're probably interested in Fusion stuff. Guess what? My whole channel, it's nothing but, making videos on how to use Fusion. So if you're interested in stuff like that, go ahead and like, subscribe, hit that bell notification, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.